Since the dawn of human society, people have modified their bodies for a variety of reasons, ranging from changes which are deemed aesthetically pleasing in a given culture, procedures for medical purposes, spiritual purposes, and even to facilitate enhancements which expand the human condition in some way. In this video, we'll look at modern examples of body modification and plastic surgery for aesthetic reasons, nootropics or smart drugs, technology as an expansion of the human condition, culminating in a look at the concept of human enhancement, where people physically augment their bodies in a way which they deem to enhance themselves. I'll get right into it, though it wouldn't be a YouTube video without the obligatory reminder to subscribe to my channel. Plastic surgery. Before getting to more of the mind-bending topics, we need to pay due diligence to the ways people change their appearance. Plastic or cosmetic surgery involves the restoration, reconstruction, or alteration of the human body, the two former categories constituting reconstructive surgery due to physical issues or injuries, with the alteration category being primarily for cosmetic purposes. We're going to focus on the latter. Whilst the topic of medical history is fascinating, this video is focused on human enhancement beyond the norm. I will mention that the oldest surgical guide dates back to 1600 BCE from ancient Egypt, known as the Edwin Smith Papyrus, and includes the plastic repair of broken noses, written in hieroglyphics of all things. Modern surgeries were more heavily influenced by the writings of Sushruta, written between 800 to 700 BC in ancient India, but both go to show how advanced those societies were, and how old nose jobs are. Today, the most popular cosmetic surgeries are nose reshaping, facelifts, eyelid surgery, liposuction, and breast augmentation. Nose reshaping usually involves making internal incisions in the nostrils to reshape bone and cartilage to give a more pleasing nasal shape. Facelifts involve the surgical removal of excess skin, then the reattachment of the remaining skin, which effectively flattens out wrinkles to give a more youthful appearance. Eyelid surgery is a very similar process, but with the aim of unhooding eyes or lifting drooping eyelids. Liposuction is the process of removing excess fat to reduce an individual's overall body mass to appear slimmer. Breast augmentation is usually the process of having silicone implanted into the individual's chest to give the appearance of larger breasts, though there are also procedures which use fat deposits taken from other areas of the body instead of silicone. In each case, the aim is to make the recipient more beautiful or attractive by contemporary standards of beauty. In the US alone, cosmetic surgeons conduct over 15 million procedures each year, so the prevalence is quite astonishing. This is all a relatively recent development. In the 60s, these procedures were being trialled and tested, with each becoming more regular and standardised since the 70s and 80s. In the past, these surgeries would predominantly have taken place on older people, who want to retain a youthful appearance, but in recent years, the average age of those receiving cosmetic surgery has significantly dropped. In 2017, the average age of women receiving surgeries dropped below 40 for the first time. Concepts of beauty are recursive, and often intensified over time. What this means is that we, as a society, look at images of beautiful people on screens and in print, which acts to tell us what is beautiful. That beauty is something which people aim to emulate, and eventually escalate. Bigger breasts, smaller noses, slimmer waists. What many of us know, but don't fully internalise, is that the media we consume is heavily edited. We've all heard of unrealistic beauty standards, but we shouldn't understate how impossible these are naturally. So our concept of beauty ends up being something which is fundamentally unhuman, and to achieve it, people need to go under the knife. There are some really interesting consequences to this. Not only do we have people trying to emulate a doctored image, resulting in a cultural prevalence of body dysmorphia and low self-esteem, but in our own minds, with a shared cultural concept, we consider that image to be the epitome of beauty through the repetitious images we are fed. I won't dwell on the nonsense in Hollywood and media, but it's certainly concerning that these beautiful characteristics are often quite adolescent in nature, if not childlike. In the collective psyche, this makes natural human appearance inferior to what we are presented with in media, and we are a society of individuals who feel that inferiority. Guy Debord, the French philosopher, would have argued that these are not only images on a screen, but fundamentally a constructed social relationship between one another, which is mediated by those images. Our relationships with one another and shared perceptions have been altered. Our minds and self-perception have been altered, and there's a feedback loop, which means it escalates. We've all seen lips as thick as sausages and noses which barely protrude, and seem to get more extreme. The media itself homogenises cultures, meaning the once distinct characteristics of individual cultures are slowly diminished over time, until they become very similar to one another. A lowest common denominator. This goes a bit beyond our collective concepts of beauty into the social, economic, and political conditions of the world. It's worth noting though, because there is an unfortunate byproduct in people from places like China and South America electing to have surgery to have more Caucasian eyes, and people from Middle Eastern countries undergoing skin lightening treatments. There's the loss of the distinctness which had developed independently in cultures, and we're left with something which is, fundamentally, inauthentic and not real. Some people might argue that cosmetic surgery is an enhancement of the human condition, an ability to move away from the limitations of our genetics, giving people the opportunity to look how they want to look, and for possible modes of expression to be expanded. There are people who want to appear more cat-like, some who have horns installed and eyeballs tattooed, each to present themselves in a way which they want to be perceived. It shouldn't be ignored though, that in many of these cases there's body dysmorphia involved, and even those with more standard procedures are often left with physical ailments, and even the realisation that the surgery didn't fix their self-esteem issues. They've got bigger breasts, but they still don't meet the impossible standard of a doctored image. The history of plastic surgery itself is quite dark. The first recipient of breast augmentation, Timmy Jean Lindsay, was not properly educated about the procedure and didn't particularly want it. She only did it to receive separate work on her ears. Timmy ended up with chronic pain, a burst implant, general unhappiness, as well as facing constant harassment and wolf whistling on the street. Even those who want the surgery to appear more beautiful end up turning themselves into an object of gaze and, in some ways, reduce themselves to that low common cultural denominator we've talked about. Trappening. Trappening is a procedure where a hole is bored out of the skull of an individual, with the skin above being allowed to heal over the gap. Medically, it's used to alleviate cranial pressure, so it can be used to treat brain swelling. It's also been used to treat epilepsy and some mental illnesses. Historically, and even today, some groups had trappening procedures for spiritual reasons. Mayan, Inca, and Aztec cultures used trappening ritualistically. It's not known what the precise reasons were, but those who have undergone the procedure today say that it's expanded their consciousness in some way. Trappening was not limited to Central and South America, but rather, different cultures from across the globe independently discovered and practiced trappening. It's definitely a bit bizarre that there were multiple cultures independently deciding to drill holes in their own heads. It certainly makes you wonder if there's something to it. Amanda Felding is a recipient of the surgery who runs the Beckley Foundation, a non-profit organisation which funds research on psychedelics. She claims that trappening facilitates blood circulation in the brain and also increases the ability of toxins to be flushed from the system. The results, apparently, are feelings of lightness, less neuroticism, and heightened effects of psychedelic drugs. A separate study by Moskalenko found that blood entering the brain increased 8 to 10% on average after trappening, which means the brain has more fuel, for lack of a better word, to increase its processing power. It's worth noting that there's been very little research on this topic, and frankly, a lot of the reported positive changes are based on general feelings which are not particularly measurable. It's certainly an interesting topic, though very risky in practice. Felding herself believes the effects are achievable through other means, such as focused breathing and yoga. However, the effects of trappening are permanent. It was popular amongst rock stars in the 60s and 70s, though that isn't a particularly convincing argument in favour of the procedure. Nootropics. Moving away from physical augmentation, the human mind is something capable of so much, but we all have our limits. IQ is a flawed measurement, but similar metrics could be used in principle to measure the lowest and highest potential an individual might have given certain opportunities. This measured potential could be further limited by conditions such as ADHD, which can limit attention capacity, but you get the idea. Some of you may have seen Limitless, a film about a man who takes a drug which allows him to use 100% of his brain power instead of the usual 10%, and ends up being able to process minute details at blistering speeds, thinking at a level far beyond what's usually possible. In real life, using 100% of your brain at once will constitute a seizure, but it does get us onto the topic of nootropics. Nootropics, smart drugs, or cognitive enhancers are a category of drug which are intended to allow people to think better. This category is broad and involves anything from caffeine, which as a stimulant increases alertness, to supplemental vitamins such as vitamin D3, which contributes towards neurotransmitter synthesis, and even to smart drugs such as modafinil. I should add that I'm not condoning the use of any of these substances. Rather, this video is for education only and primarily looks at these drugs in the context of human enhancement. I'm sure you can tell from the sections we've covered already that I don't think that these are all positive. Modafinil is predominantly a drug used to alleviate feelings of sleepiness in those who suffer from conditions like sleep apnea and narcolepsy. However, like many medical drugs, there are off-label uses as well. In those who have sleep conditions, the drug increases executive function, or, in other words, it helps them think more clearly. The drug is a stimulant, and, in reducing sleepiness, it helps the user concentrate better. Evidence on whether it helps non-sleep deprived adults concentrate better is less clear. One 2019 study found that it led to a small, but statistically significant effect on adults, and another 2015 study found that in some users it had a positive effect on attention, learning and memory, but on others it limited creative thinking. That study also noted that they found no negative side effects of mood changes. A later 2020 study, however, concluded that the work in the previous studies was not supported by the evidence they had. It's possible that positive effects could just be caused by the fact that modafinil is a stimulant, like caffeine, and therefore increases alertness and concentration, though it does also make caffeine quite a wonder drug itself when considering that fact. I had a flatmate at university who used modafinil to get a particularly difficult assignment done, and whilst I don't know what dosage he took, I'd never seen anyone so jittery and with deeper bags under their eyes afterwards. There are other drugs with similar effects, such as amphetamines and methylphenidate, the latter also having positive effects on the performance of repetitive tasks, but research has shown that each of these becomes detrimental to learning in higher doses. To list some other nootropics in this category, cholinergics allow better synthesis of vital nutrients in the brain, which I should note is the trend for many forms of nootropics. They don't necessarily do anything. Rather, they allow usual brain processes to be a bit more efficient by providing the right fuel. This is also the case with creatine monohydrate, where levels of ATP are increased by consumption. ATP contributes towards cellular energy, which helps both muscle production and even reasoning skills. Finally, L-theanine is a substance which, when taken with caffeine, reduces the jitteriness associated with caffeine and enhances the cognitive effects. Of all the nootropics so far, I think caffeine, L-theanine and creatine monohydrate are the only ones considered both safe and effective by actual studies. The other main category of nootropic use relates to psychedelic microdosing, taking small amounts of substances like LSD or magic mushrooms without going over the threshold to achieve a high. There isn't evidence of the effectiveness of microdosing. Studies have found conflicting outcomes for participants, causing both increased and decreased levels of anxiety, as well as both positive and negative moods. A double-blind study found that participants perform the same on cognitive tasks, so there is very little evidence that it actually does anything. If any nootropics are effective, there are of course some ethical implications. In a similar way to doping in sports, it could give an unfair advantage to those who use the substances. But further, if certain levels of performance are hypothetically expected based on use of those drugs, there could well be a developing expectation or pressure to take those drugs to function. Drugs like Adderall are taken quite heavily in academic circles, which is concerning. In some ways, this has already happened more widely in society with caffeine use. In offices, I can imagine a pharmacy counter sat next to the coffee pot already. Why are offices so depressing? The last consideration is just reliance. Many drugs have positive effects, but their potency becomes weakened each time it's taken, and can sometimes have negative effects when not taking the drug after initially taking it. So we could end up with people who need to take the drug just to maintain normal executive function, and they'd be better off having never started. Technology is expanding the human condition. Studies on short-term memory have found that humans, on average, have the ability to hold 7 ± 2 items in their memory at any one time. This means that the amount of items we can memorise at once is limited. However, technology allows us to record endless lists of information that we can then refer to, which allows us to effectively remember more things than we otherwise could. This is a simple example, and is true even of pen and paper, which is itself a form of technology. The effect, though, is to allow us to think beyond our natural cognitive limits. Humans in nature would not have been able to hold a great deal of information in short-term memory, but with the aid of notepads, we can now do so in practice. It's worth noting that education itself is a form of human enhancement. Books, 2. Allow humans to draw on information and knowledge which would be impossible to memorise in the state of nature, allowing us to know more, do more, and therefore act in different ways beyond what is naturally possible. We will have a full encyclopedia of the breadth of human knowledge in our pockets. So whilst previously we needed to read and learn something for us to know information to aid our thinking processes, we no longer even need to do that. A good memory is no longer as useful in society as knowing how to find and utilise information. Programmers, for example, are able to create more complex code through showing basic operations on GitHub. Our phones are an extension of ourselves, which allow us to have access to all this knowledge. It doesn't even have to be in our heads at all. To put it another way, if you consider the phone as an extension of ourselves, we're able to act in ways which would otherwise be impossible. So we're changed by the technology, reliant on it for information, and it's therefore psychologically a part of ourselves. It has become a central feature in how we process information. Think of it like a non-invasive technological implant into our behaviour and processes. We could even frame it in the context of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In the same way that having easy access to food, water and shelter allows us to work towards self-actualization, technology allows the thinking we do to skip some otherwise required steps, which allows us to do deeper thinking. Though, here, the esteem issues created by said technologies could also have a limiting factor too, so it isn't all rosy. Beyond Google, the technology even feeds into our relationships, where we can maintain and even create relationships when not in physical proximity, as well as having constant access to news and developments. We're all brought together by this. The cultural homogeneity that I mentioned before does of course have negative effects, but it's undeniable that having a low common denominator also allows for a new kind of communication. This is related to the concept of memes. Not just the funny pictures we see on Reddit, but Richard Dawkins' concept of the meme as an idea, behaviour or style that spreads through cultures with symbolic meaning behind them. This is of course also what internet memes are. I can convey quite a direct message to you if I refer to someone as a Karen. There's a language behind the language which we both understand. There are dangers in this. The Karen example specifically could mean we've internalised some fringe, misogynistic concepts unintentionally. And whilst we're seemingly just making a joke, what's been inserted into our minds and conceptual framework is an idea of some women as difficult. Whilst the concept of a Karen is quite specific, I use it as an example because corners of the internet like 4chan have actively utilised the creation of similar memes to normalise fringe, ideological concepts. I should be clear that I might not stand by the parallel in relation to Karen memes as misogynistic, as I don't think it suggests all women are difficult, but I absolutely would stand by it in relation to other alt-right memes, which are quite nefarious and have preyed on a depressingly high number of vulnerable people. Humans aren't that dissimilar to animals. To frame it in terms of Pavlov found that dogs who heard a bell every time they ate would eventually begin to salivate after only hearing the bell, with no other signs of food. This is operant conditioning, and our minds associate disparate environmental stimuli simply because that is how we process information. We might have self-awareness, but we're just as prone to having our thoughts manipulated due to the predictable ways we process information. Human enhancement. Here we get into the really murky stuff. Up until now, there's a lack of permanency in the changes we've made to our collective psyches. It's true that cultural ideas could continue to permeate, but it's possible a child could be raised on a desert island away from them. A mass EMP could wipe out all technology and technological capabilities. The physical changes people make to their bodies die with them, and drugs are only effective for as long as they're in your system. Here though, we're looking at changes to the fundamental fabric of humanity. Genetic modification is the process of adding to, removing from, or amending the genetic code within our genome. We've been doing it with food for years by modifying crops to produce a better harvest, so this isn't a potential future technology, it's here now. CRISPR is a technology which allows scientists to alter DNA with the precision to activate or deactivate single genes, or, alternatively, insert or remove whole sequences. At present, much of the human-based research surrounds medical treatment, specifically testing the removal of cancer-causing genes to protect patients. However, it has the capability of altering significant parts of the genome of an individual. This has far-reaching consequences, as genes are, of course, inherited, at least with germline engineering. So we have the ability to create a person who, for us at least, has the ideal characteristics of the perfect human, and pass those characteristics on to offspring. Though as we've seen with recursive feedback loops already, this could very well escalate what our concept of a perfect human is, until we end up with something that's not actually human at all. Ilya Ivanov was a Russian biologist who specialised in the fields of artificial insemination and interspecies hybridisation of animals. He conducted work in the 1920s to try to artificially inseminate female chimpanzees with human sperm. However, he was not successful in producing a pregnancy. This is probably a bit of a side note, as it isn't properly to do with human enhancement, but I do think the idea of a half-human creature poses an interesting topic, as if Ivanov had been successful, we would have been faced with a question of whether that creature was human or not. It also relates to CRISPR technology, as sequences of DNA from other animals can sometimes be the source for genes which are being inserted. Does that constitute an interspecies creature? Where's the line? I don't have the answer, but it draws parallels with the paradox of the ship of Theseus. When replacing the boards of a ship one by one, at what point does it stop being the original ship and become a new ship? The answers can vary from 50% of the ship to always remaining the same ship, depending on whether the ship is defined as that ship from occupying the space at all times, or from its constituent parts. With humans, our cells are constantly dying and being replaced, so it isn't as silly as it sounds. As an aside, my favourite iteration of the ship of Theseus paradox is Trigger's broom. Trigger, a character in the TV series Only Fools and Horses, claims he has a broom that's lasted him 20 years. Though, he notes that it's had the head replaced 17 times and the handle 14 times. Denis Rebrikov is another Russian scientist conducting work today. He's currently working on gene editing eggs with CRISPR technology to produce offspring with beneficial traits, such as HIV resistance, or even to allow the children of deaf couples, where the cause is genetic, to have the ability to hear. There are many detractors to his work. Some are concerned with the ethical implications of editing the human genome, as we've already mentioned that once it's been done, any changes cannot be undone when those children go on to reproduce. Others are concerned that even if his work is intended to be for medically beneficial reasons, the research he conducts could later be used to give children other characteristics. This could range from anything to eye colour to traits which are related to intelligence. There's already the concept of designer babies, where couples undergoing IVF select from viable embryos according to genetic traits they have. However, this is a step further. ADHD is something we've already talked about, and is a condition which is often inherited. Medically, it's a condition which has negative effects, but there are also positive traits associated with it, such as the ability to hyperfocus and a propensity towards creativity. If we were to begin to edit these conditions out of the human race, we could end up with a potential artist just being another office worker. Our society is geared towards productivity, and it doesn't seem too far-fetched that the traits selected for gene editing would be those which enhance productive capabilities, rather than less economically productive traits. On the flip side, even if it is all objectively good characteristics which are added, if access to such genetic engineering is limited to the wealthy, would we have a situation which reifies the contingent economic divide of our societies into our very genetic makeup? A split genome of the superior and inferior based on how much money they have today. This takes us firmly into the realm of eugenics. Eugenics historically was concerned around race theory, which was both unscientific and wildly racist. Today, the new eugenicists are working on ways to enhance humans to eliminate undesirable traits to create better opportunities. The issue is, of course, the question of who decides what is desirable, and that the given ambitions of a particular culture at a particular time would leave a permanent stamp on a very genetic makeup. To me, this would limit human progress. Evolution has always occurred because random genetic mutations turn out to be beneficial, and subsequently, those genes are more likely to be passed on. To instead decide what's passed on removes the need for it to actually be beneficial. Rather, natural benefits are irrelevant, and beneficial traits to a particular culture are forced into our DNA. It might seem a bit far-fetched, but even scientists are not immune to the cultural zeitgeist of their day. The work of Nazi scientists surely confirms that, though even in America there were scientists working on very similar things at the time, though their work was largely conducted on poverty-stricken African American communities and the homeless rather than Jewish prisoners. HIV resistance would be a good thing, but as we know, once Pandora's box is opened, it can't be closed, and we have the entire future of humanity to make a mistake, which could be very short after said mistake. Artificial intelligence is another topic which could contribute towards human enhancement, though it's a bit less direct in its permanency. Varela and Maturana, two biologists and philosophers, posited that what distinguishes life from machine is quite simple. Life creates itself through a process of autopoiesis, All living cells have the capacity to reproduce and organise themselves. Machines, on the other hand, are created externally and are in a constant state of decay until they stop operating. They can be fixed, but it requires outside intervention. The nature of the universe is inclined towards decay and dissolutions of unity, to entropy. This makes living things, at least temporarily, negentropic, as the unity of our bodies persists and repairs itself. As a living being, we get more complex over time, when looking from a top-down species view, and we are self-organising. I'll gloss over the ways AI could contribute towards human technological development, and therefore the human condition, because those changes are less predictable, and we've already looked at some of them. Instead, I want to focus on two ideas: the reproduction of AI, and human-computer interfaces. The first relates to autopoiesis, which again is another word for self-organisation. Scientists have recently created living robots, small cells called xenobots, which were derived from frog embryos, which were fundamentally altered to allow new forms of replication beyond the normal cellular level to a multicellular level, meaning that they're doing something new. These xenobots also have the capacity to be programmed to conduct tasks. What this means is that an AI with xenobots at its disposal would have the ability to reproduce and repair itself, in the same way that our capacities can be extended beyond what is natural. An AI could do the same, and those technologies can be considered an extension of itself. In addition, it could program these xenobots to do a variety of other tasks, meaning more complex versions of these xenobots could be tasked with activities which are endless in number, and can improve the AI itself, even giving it some level of biological existence. Xenobots are quite a primitive creation, but there's no reason why an advanced AI could not identify and utilise other novel biological processes to achieve its ends. What this means is that an AI can go beyond being purely robotic and distinct from life, and actually be a new form of life itself, with capacities to do things we couldn't even begin to predict. This relates to the next point: human-computer interfaces. Something like a Fitbit is a human-computer interface at the most basic level. There's a connection between the output of, for example, your heart rate and the number that appears on a screen. Seeing that number changes the decisions we make, and therefore it is a non-invasive augmentation. This is similar to what I've talked about before with Google allowing us to effectively augment the amount of information we have access to, beyond our memories. As technology develops, there will of course be more types of augmentation which are possible, and some might be more invasive in their initial implant. I'm sure many of you have seen Black Mirror, which has multiple episodes on the topic, but the idea of smart implants seems quite a logical development, even if only for those with sight problems initially. The ability to have high quality perception, and even to be able to both omit and hyperfocus on details, could be aided by artificial intelligence. The possibilities are again quite literally endless, and even if we as humans aren't quite bright enough to pull it off, an AI could be. This could go even further, again, with artificial intelligence not only being input on a targeted basis, for example with sight, but instead has a direct augmented feed into our thought processes. At that point, AI and consciousness will be tied together. It's undeniable that that would lead to far higher capacities for thinking, but it could well omit many things not included in the AI, or which it deems unimportant. And further, if the implants are paid for, it could lead to further inequality in society. I'd rather keep my brain au naturel anyway. Really, the questions this raises are too numerous to list. But to give a few, when artificial intelligence can think and create better than us, what will it make us? Will we live in a utopian Star Trek future where all our needs are met? Or, without the requirement of humans to work, to produce, will there be a question of how many humans the planet does support? Utopia for some, and what for the rest? I won't dwell on Skynet too much, but I should also mention that there are conceivable outcomes which are not favourable for humanity at all if an AI singularity emerges which either doesn't see us as useful or even considers us as a threat. To finish, and on a slightly less bleak note, there are already medical implants inserted into the brain to make the brain behave in certain ways. Deep brain stimulation is a surgical procedure which implants electrodes in the brain of those with issues ranging from Parkinson's and epilepsy to obsessive compulsive disorder. The electrodes generate pulses which counteract chemical and neuronal imbalances to bring them back within a normal range to prevent the unwanted symptom of their condition, which, in the examples I gave, would be uncontrolled movements, seizures, and obsessive behaviours respectively. It's another example of brain processes being controlled, or at least affected, by machines, and I don't doubt that these principles, when combined with artificial intelligence and sophisticated devices, could have very complex impacts on our thought processes. There have been studies which allow monitoring of neuronal impulses when a subject is thinking of a particular thing, and it's able to construct a hazy image of the thing that the participant is picturing in their heads. We're all thinking beings, but the processes which lead to our thoughts are, in principle, as observable as anything else in the universe. It's all just a matter of time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, as this is a new channel and I'm trying to establish a community. A lot of work goes into these videos, and I have a lot more coming. Bye for now.